All right, and we should be live. I'm just making sure that we actually are. Yep, I'm seeing it now in my studio. So I am here with Corporal Anon or Colton. I'm not sure which one you're wanting to go by
Call
right
me
now.
Colton.
Okay, Colton. We'll go with Colton. And we are here for Leaving Young Earth Creationism. Sorry there wasn't really an intro video. I've been finding that my StreamYard quality with intro videos has been kind of, well, trash, I guess I could say. But yeah, so if you haven't been here before, this is Leaving Young Earth Creationism, where we talk about, with someone who was a Young Earth Creationist and isn't anymore. And we talk about how they became a Young Earth Creationist, when they left that belief, why they left it, who influenced them, all those sorts of things. And so we try to get that story. And so I'm here with Colton. And Colton, why don't you give us a little bit about yourself before we dive into the Young Earth Creationist stuff?
Well, I consider myself just your typical, I guess, internet evolutionist at this point. Again, we're here because I am a former Young Earth Creationist. I'm currently a geology student. I am about 2 years away from having my bachelor's degree. So that's the angle I kind of lean in on this whole thing on. That's where I leaned when I was, and now obviously that's where I lean now that I'm against it. Yeah, I mean, there's not much really else to say. Other than that, I don't have much else interesting about me.
Well,
unless you count being an addict to zombie films.
Well, hey, I like a good zombie flick every once in a while. But I think it's interesting because I would say that in the sort of counter-creationist community, which you are a member of, in case anyone hasn't seen it, Colton and I have been on a few videos together on the Gutsick Gibbon channel, where we were discussing various things. And Colton it's nice to have him around because I would say most of the people countering creationism, especially online, are much more into the biological side of Young Earth creationism, and they only sort of dabble in the geology side. So it's very nice to have someone who has a lot more geology under his belt, because then you can go over all the reasons why the geology isn't making even a lick of sense.
So I'm sure I'll be more used when I actually have some formal degrees, but I have some formal classes, so it's better than nothing.
I mean, you know more about it than I do, you know more about it.
Yourself. There's really not a lot to it.
You also know more about it than any Young Earth creationist.
That is a low bar.
Well, yeah. So, but anyway, so we'll just go into the whole Young Earth creationist thing. So, about how old were you when you became a Young Earth creationist?
I would say I was either 10 or 11. Mind if I go into a little bit of a story?
No, that's fine. Go for it.
Okay, so back when I'd just gotten out of 5th grade, so I was about 11 years old. There was a big summer trip that my family had planned, and at the time, my dad was married to this fundamentalist Christian woman. And one of the places that we went on this summer trip, and it was a cool trip, we went to Washington and then to Michigan and then to the Grand Canyon, but we stopped at the Creation Museum. And little 11-year-old me doesn't really understand what I'm looking at first. I see dinosaurs. I thought it was just a science museum because at the time I had just been like, anytime I was in church, I didn't really pay that much attention. I'm 11 years old. I mean, what do I care?
Right.
But I did like science. I always had all the science books about the rocks and the planets and all kinds of things. And so we go in there and I'm seeing that, and I'm seeing like sculptures of Adam and Eve with dinosaurs in the Garden of Eden. And compared to a children's science book, it kind of made sense. And so I was like, oh, this is actually really cool. And so this gets me starting just to talk about it with like my step siblings. And they were like 14, 15 at the time. So they start telling me more about it. And they start inviting me to the youth group with some of the older kids. And at the church that we were at, they had ICR magazines, Answers in Genesis magazines, just basic materials that younger kids and teenagers could actually access discussing Young Earth creationism. And as I got older and I could understand more of it, I just started getting into it.
Okay. So you didn't have any...
I'd say around like 10 or 11 is when I like got like when I was first like, oh, cool, this seems like it's a thing. And it just kind of evolved from there.
So before that, you wouldn't say that you necessarily had a position. You were just sort of naive to the subject.
Yeah, I would say so.
Okay.
I do recall a few moments where like my stepsister would say some stupid nonsense that would make my dad laugh because my dad was never a young Earth creationist. He was always like the outcast old Earth creationist in the family.
Okay.
For example, when we were at the Creation Museum, he and his wife got into a fight outside at like their little food place because he had walked past the diorama that they have of like the dinosaurs being led onto the ark, and he looked at it and said, "What a crock of shit." And that did not fly over well with her because she took it very personally.
I see.
Yeah, so it was an interesting dynamic.
Well, that that is interesting. That is amusing. Um, so you said that you joined the youth group with the older kids, and that sort of, I guess, reinforced a lot of the things that you had learned at the museum.
Yeah.
Okay. And so, who were some of the influences as far as your beliefs about creationism, as far as like, the sort of young Earth creationists who would do it at a professional level, like a Ken Ham or something like that?
I never really gave Ken Ham that much thought. He always just kind of seemed like some weird grandpa figure to me, if that makes any sense.
It
Um,
does.
I just he wasn't that interesting. There was as I got to around like 14 years old and I was starting to get really passionate with it, I was influenced by John Woodmorap and how he really doesn't like radiometric dating. And I thought a lot of what he said made sense because I wasn't at the stage of fact checking any of this at that point. There was also I didn't really give Snelling that much of a glance. I did like Steve Austin's stuff about like Mount St. Helens because he kind of reinforced the stuff that looks like it happens slow can happen fast, that kind of thing. Um, I read some of like the magazine articles by Michael Ord, but I can't recall any that really stood out as impressing me. Um, yeah, I would say mostly people like Steve Austin, people like John Woodmorap were probably some of the two
Okay.
biggest influencers on me.
So even at say 14, you were trending towards sort of the geological side of the whole thing.
Yeah, I mean that because and part of the reason for that was in that same summer trip from when I was younger, we had gone to the Grand Canyon, and you know how there's creationists that are always at the Grand
I am
Canyon doing
aware.
like, the public talks. And my dad did the exact same thing. He was like, "No, look, you can see the different layers and they're different times. Like, come on, you have to be stupid to think this is young." But I didn't really follow that. So that kind of got me interested in, oh, cool. They say there's all this evidence for one of the most important stories in the Bible being a literal global event. That sounds like it's probably more important than trying to say why evolution is a big poo poo.
Okay.
So that's kind of why I started leaning in that direction.
Okay. I can see that. Yeah. Evolution isn't something that's really talked about in the Bible. However, the flood absolutely is. The Bible is
Yeah,
kind of nebulous on biology.
yeah. To make my thoughts a bit more concise, it was more important to me to like look into this topic from a angle of bolstering a positive case, in my view at least, for my own faith, and everything else, as far as I concerned, wasn't really an issue.
Okay. So, how long did you stay as a young Earth creationist? Like, around what age did you stop being one?
So I was around 15 when I stopped because I was getting into more technical stuff by John Woodenrap, not like books of theirs or anything, but like he has more technical articles on creation.com and the Journal of Creation, and you can find like PDFs of his stuff. Because at the time I was really looking at flaws of radiometric dating,
Okay.
and I Woodenrap was one of the key guys at the time. I wasn't that aware of the rate project by then. I had heard some evident claims that they had been faster in the past.
And to
But
clarify, we should probably explain what the rate project is. I don't think that's a widely known thing outside of.
yeah, that's actually a good idea. So the rate project was this thing done by the Institute for Creation Research back in like 2000, so like right when I was born, and they were looking for evidence that radiometric of they were looking for some angle of whether or not radiometric decay could fit with scripture or not, and their angle was to come at it from two ways. So you had like Austin and Snelling, who were kind of looking for evidence that the methods didn't work, and their goal of finding whether or not there was accelerated nuclear decay, which was like the main goal of this project, that was kind of secondary to them. And then you had people like Russell Humphreys, who were trying to look for positive evidence that nuclear decay rates had been substantially faster in the past. And this contrasts with people like John Woodmarap, who was one of my big influences, because Woodmarap doesn't buy into any of that. Right. He'll mention it occasionally, like there may have been some evidence, but as far as he's concerned, at least as far as I know at this point, I don't know if he's changed his mind since then, radiometric dating was a crock of shit. I mean, it was just random noise that people were just throwing darts at the board at, and if they got a number that fit with how old they wanted the rock to be, they'd pick that and they'd throw away hundreds of others.
I see.
And, yeah.
And my favorite thing, by the way, about the rate study is their conclusion that they required, quote, exotic solutions, unquote, to the problems that they had found. That otherwise, in other words, the only way the Earth can be young is if God miracled all of the radiometric isotopes.
I mean, well, if you looked at, or if you listened to Erica's talk with Steve McRae last night, and Steve was talking about how he'd corresponded with Russell Humphreys in the past. It's like, well, why do you think that decay rates were faster and not like, I don't know, try to find some different explanation for these isotopes other than radioactive decay? And he was just like, well, it just couldn't be any other way. It has to be accelerated decay because God knows it can't be normal.
Right. Otherwise, my conclusion is wrong.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah. Which is, of course, the exact opposite of how you are supposed to do science. My conclusion is based on what is evident, not that what is evident must be something that will fit with my prior conclusion. Mm-hmm. So, sorry.
Go ahead. No, go ahead. It wasn't really relevant.
Well, so I was just going to ask you, so you were looking into Humphreys about the age of the Earth and things like that, and you were investigating radiometric dating as a technique, and what kinds of things did you find that started to lead you away from young Earth?
So I was looking at Woodmarap's original arguments for a young Earth view of radiometric dating and how he thought it was random noise and that it was all just cherry picked and there were tons of discordances that not just you could find in the literature, but that the exact reason you can't find that many examples in the literature is because they're just hidden.
Oh, it's conspiracy.
Yeah, he was coming at it from that kind of angle, and I was eating it up. But then I got this. I don't really know where it came from, but I was like, I should see if somebody has read this book and disagreed. So I just looked up like his article titles on Google, and up comes the work of Dr. Kevin Henke, who's a PhD geologist, and oh boy, that was kind of a rude awakening. Because Henke went through like every one of his books and articles talking about this, and he showed that Woodmarap was completely misrepresenting the papers. He would say the papers said something when the papers actually said the exact opposite. He would leave out what the discordances were, which in almost all cases were like less than 1% relevance anyways to the dating of the formation. I mean, it was just awful. And so I was like, oh, okay, that's not good.
Wait, are you saying that the difference between say the difference between say 101 million year olds rock and say 99 million?
Yeah.
Like that difference, you can't fit a young Earth inside there?
Yeah, he was calling those kinds of minor disagreements major discordances. And then there was one article that I particularly found kind of shaking, where Henke was directly addressing Woodmarap's claim that these are just random noise and that most of the samples are thrown away. Henke pulled out charts of how much it costs to run a radiometric dating sample, and doing like one run on a piece of rock for like potassium argon is like $700, and that was in 1999. So God knows what it is today, and like accounting for inflation. And so that would mean if you have to go through like 95 samples to get one good one, you are throwing away literally tens of thousands of dollars per study. And there's just not that kind of money to go around. It can't be that way. Economically, that view has to be false.
Yeah, people don't fund research quite so well as to allow you to do that.
Yeah. So I was kind of like, ooh, okay, maybe I really shouldn't be relying on Woodmarap. He clearly hasn't really looked into this as well as he thinks. So I started backing down from that. And I wasn't too sure of the rate stuff. I really didn't actually get into reading their stuff until I had actually left Young Earth Creationism. So instead I started moving towards, more like the physical geologic features to try to bolster my case. Like, forget the radiometric dating. I'll figure that out at some other point. What are the physical features in the rocks that clearly indicate a global flood? So I moved to that, and it was like, okay, well, there's no way that you could get such massive formations like the Tepete sandstone on a conventional geologic scenario. But now that I had already had a little bit of experience of maybe I should be fact-checking these claims, I started looking it up. And turns out when you combine how big a continental shelf can be with the fact that seas move over time, yeah, there's not really a problem with having continent-spanning strata in any sort of older timeline. Yeah. I mean, these are just sea transgressions. And not only that, you can follow how the strata move over time. You can see how they start grading into each other, and then now it turns into like a deeper water shale deposit, and the sandstone has moved like 100 miles inland, showing the sea moved all that way. And I was like, oh, okay, I guess that's really not a problem.
Hold on. Strata do in fact blend into each other. They don't always have just razor straight, paper thin barriers between them.
Yes, and if people who actually looked at drill cores, they would see that. But
I've seen him look at a drill core because he showed him one.
He called it drawing.
By the way, we're referring to a certain someone who has been on this channel once, probably never will be again, but with whom Colton had a debate recently, wherein his
paper's thin, and now I'm triggered.
Yeah, basically he showed this Young Earth Creationist actual data from papers, and the Young Earth Creationist responded with cherry-picked Google images of strata layers, and that was his argument. It was like, oh, but look at these pictures I pulled off of Google.
I had actually figured out what one of the big miscommunications that he and I had was. And this is why somebody on the Debate Evolution subreddit who was watching it actually caught this too. He was calling them strata when what he was asking about were bedding planes. Oh. So when I was trying to explain how you can see strata like pinch out and interfinger with each other, he was trying to talk about how do you get distinct bedding planes, which is a completely different topic. I
see. And at the request of Gutsick Gibbon, who, as I like to say, is almost like the co-host of the channel, given how often I have her on, I will, in fact, name names. It was, in fact, Nephilim-free. So there you go. Now you know it was Nephilim-free. The man who denies ever having been a geocentrist, even though it's trivial to find footage of him calling himself a geocentrist and saying the entire universe rotates around the Earth. Yep. The same guy who said that people photoshopped into his favorites a particular escort service in California, even though that was on video, not just a screenshot. That same Nephilim-free, yep, the same one who thinks that water can be pushed up from underneath the crust of the Earth and impact the moon and cause the craters, even though that system couldn't even have close to enough energy. Yep, that's the guy.
Yep.
Just so you know.
Yeah, fun times.
Yeah. So you started fact checking, which I think that's the difference between people who will and are unlikely to leave Young Earth Creationism. Once you start actually fact checking, I mean, it's over because none of the facts check out.
Yeah, that's essentially how it went. So I went through that whole the layers cover too much distance, and that didn't really seem to be a problem. The secular geologists were saying, no, looks just like a transgressing continental shelf. Nothing really amazing here. And I tried looking up creationist counters to that, and none of them really fit. And they weren't explaining most of what I was reading. At best, there was a couple of cherry-picked claims of, well, that doesn't work because of this. And then you read the literature and, well, no, there's actually a perfectly good explanation for that. Another one is this claim that when you look at unconformities, you don't see erosion. It looks like any other bedding plane, and that's wrong. You can actually go to a lot of places where there are unconformities, and you will see very deep channeling. And often at the times with the stuff that fills these channels, you will see solid rock broken off from the underlying layer, meaning there was time for it to lithify. Then there's the fact that you can do like 3D scanning over places where you don't see an unconformity. And you can do this over a wide area, and you can find entire buried canyons, landscapes, mountain roots, mesas that were durable enough to survive the erosive process. And then as sedimentation began, they were buried. And if you looked at it flatly at an outcrop in the road, you won't see it. But if you scan with seismic sound waves and you actually get a 3D image of the area, oh, it pops out.
Yeah, that was one of the things I thought was the most fascinating when you talked about the Surprise Canyon, because you can take a 3D model of it, and it's an actual canyon. It's a canyon that's been filled in with various sediments and is now just a part of the rock, right? Like if you were to walk over it, you wouldn't notice. But when you actually get this 3D map of the different strata, it's a straight up canyon. And how does a flood form a canyon inside of the flood that starts after the flood? And
I don't know, man.
I don't know.
I actually find that, although I do love that formation, one of the ones that I think is probably more important is this 2011 paper where they actually found an entire buried landscape that has over 1,000 meters of vertical elevation that has been filled in. And it's got everything from mountain peaks to a big incised canyon. And it's just all free to see. And when they drilled right into the canyon walls, they found paleosols, which, for those who don't know, is basically a fossilized soil horizon. And they found coal, and they have found pollen. Every indicator that this was a terrestrial surface, not some mid-flood underwater canyon. And it's in Eocene strata, so it can't be a part of the pre-flood world because it's carved into fossil-bearing strata that have to be from the flood. But then it's filled in with fossil-bearing strata that are too big to be explained by post-flood processes.
Yeah.
So essentially, they have to get a buried landscape that looks like modern surface erosion, just normal everyday processes in the middle of a global flood in a year. And I don't see that happening.
I can't even imagine the circumstances that would allow it to.
Yeah. So essentially, repeat this for other arguments. There was the fact I tried looking into the claim that there's, not enough salt in the oceans, and I come to find that the creationists who were doing that study ignored over 16 mechanisms for removing salt from the sea. Same with the sediment on the seafloor, that kind of thing.
That's actually one of my favorites, is the salt in the sea, because that comes, the first place I know of that is in the book Creation Science by Morris.
Was that like the one from 1974?
Something like that, which I have a copy of on my shelf, by the way.
I think it's Scientific Creationism.
Yeah, scientific. Yeah, that could be. Yeah, scientific creationism. Right.
Yeah.
And he has this table of salt, like deposition rates versus how much is in there, and then he does the quick little algebra to figure out how long that would take to accumulate. And several of the things that he lists, including I think aluminum salts, would take less than 200 years to accumulate. It's like, well, either this can't be used.
Aluminum builds up in under 100 years, and the problem is, you can do the exact same calculations and you can make all the excuses you want for how, well, those processes that remove aluminum from the ocean won't actually do enough of it. But fact of the matter is, it does.
Right. And that's the thing.
The exact same excuses for salt can be applied to aluminum and they don't work.
Yeah. And my favorite thing about it, though, is that he doesn't even address this. He doesn't even go into the fact that, hey, according to your own table and the argument you just gave, the Earth has to be less than 200 years old. So why should I trust you for the one part of the table that actually tends to agree with you?
Yeah, exactly.
It's in your own book, Henry Morris. I know Henry Morris is dead and whatever. I can't talk to him. But I read it as a young, probably early high school creationist. I think I even bought my own copy. I don't know how I managed to do that. I can't imagine it was at a local bookstore. It might have been in a church bookstore somewhere. But yeah, I got my own copy while I was in high school, and I was sitting there reading Scientific Creationism by Morris. And I also read Evolution, The Fossils Still Say No. I couldn't find the
Oh, you
original
couldn't
version.
find the original, I guess?
No, I had to find The Fossils Still Say No, which is still on my bookshelf. I still have a copy of the Genesis Flood. Like, I went through and I read all the quote-unquote classics of Young Earth
Yeah, I
creation.
have one that I never really got to, Starlight in Time by Russell Humphreys. I haven't read this yet because I was supposed to talk to it with an old Earth creationist, talk about it and discuss like his things about physics, but we never got around to it.
Christiane Ganelli says it's weird we don't really have YEC here in Europe. There's a reason for that.
It's an American phenomenon.
Yeah, Young Earth creationism started in the United States with the Seventh-day Adventist movement.
Ooh, they don't like that, though. They don't like you talking about that.
Well, they don't like me talking about it, but it's absolutely true. Ellen G. White received a quote-unquote vision from God that enforced in her the necessity to push Noah's flood as an actual, literal, historical event.
And that was taken up by George McCready Price in the 1920s, wasn't it?
I believe that's correct,
and then he was kind of a thing. He went and tried to make some like the common sense of the flood book, and then like geologists even in the 1930s before plate tectonics looked at it and they were like, what the hell are you doing? Yeah. Nothing in this is true. And there's even students of McCready Price who there's records of saying, we went out into the field with some actual geologists for like a mining company, and the fossils are in way stricter of an order than McCready ever told us they could be.
Yeah. So the reason that Young Earth creationism it's not entirely restricted to the United States, but it is almost entirely restricted to the Anglosphere.
Yeah.
Basically,
if you're some in Australia,
a few in New Zealand,
New Zealand, and then mostly America.
Yeah, I actually don't even know too many in South Africa. I think there might be a few.
I would honestly doubt it.
I do know of one
cultural for them, you know that.
Well, I do know of one Christian apologist who I don't really talk about because he doesn't do anything about evolution, but he is getting a PhD from a Christian school in South Africa, and I can't imagine he'd be doing it if they weren't at least somewhat towing the YEC line.
Mm-hmm.
So,
Erica asked is that the White Hole book? Yes, it is. Starlight in Time is the one where Humphreys says that in order to account for vast starlight, very distant like galaxies and stuff, essentially the Earth is centered, according to him, inside of a white hole, which I find hilarious because we have never been able to demonstrate that white holes even exist.
Not only could
yeah,
sorry,
and so he's saying that there basically is one.
We're in it.
We're in it. Ignore the fact that should be blue shifting all the light that's coming in. And
it's worse than that.
Basically, billions of years of time has genuinely happened
elsewhere
outside of the solar system, but time dilation from this white hole has made time go extremely slow for us.
Well, it's worse than just that the light shift shouldn't be what it is. The thing about it is, if Earth is in a white hole, nothing from outside of a white hole can enter the white hole. So you shouldn't be able to see any of the light because there are no paths that lead to the singularity of a white hole.
White holes spew stuff out. That's the entire physics of it. Hugh Ross has a good article tearing it apart, and Humphreys tried to respond to it and absolutely failed.
Which actually brings me around to the topic that I wanted to talk about next, which is to say, why did you go from if your big problem was geology, why did you not, or did you have a period with old Earth creationism?
Oh, I mean, I did, but I mean, because remember, my dad's an old Earth creationist,
right?
So I never had the intrinsic feeling of you absolutely have to believe in a young Earth to be a Christian. That wasn't really so much my main concern. Instead of saying, it was more of the appeal of, well, if the Earth is young, then I can make a positive evidentiary case.
Which is true. If it is young, you should be able to.
Now, I did kind of have some thoughts, but it could not have been more than a few weeks. Thinking, well, maybe the Earth is old, but evolution didn't happen. Because at the time, I was just getting into my biology class at my military academy, and we had a long thing right at the start about evolutionary theory, because my teacher was a big evolution proponent, and he knew how important it was to biology. this guy had casts of fossils like Tiktaalik. I don't know where he got them from, but he actually gave us the ability to just hold them and feel them and look at them. And he had all these books going on about it. He would hand draw notes of like different sort of transitional fossils, like draw them by hand to show us the different features. It was real personalized. And he actually did make us go over some of the issues of creationism and what they have with explaining the existence of these fossils. And so being able to actually like see replicas of it, I mean, I was never in the camp of these are just forgeries. I can't buy that. I'm sorry. And
to be fair, I think most young Earth creationists wouldn't say the fossils are straight up forgeries. They have other weird.
Yeah, that's mostly a boomer creationist thing for sure.
Yeah.
But yeah, it was just the ability to actually get like some sort of real education on the importance. He did a whole thing on the predictive power of evolution, how it predicted where Tiktaalik was, how it predicted things like the fusion of chromosome 2 and endogenous retroviruses and all sorts of things. And it was more of this moment of, well, I never really thought this was stupid, but this actually makes a lot of sense.
Okay.
And I didn't really struggle with it, at least in terms of accepting evolution, because I also had this brief moment of, could I go and see what the young Earth creationist camp has to say about this stuff? Well, I could, but if they sucked that bad with geology, why am I going to care what else they have to say about something else?
Yeah, I mean, technically that logic doesn't quite follow in a strict sense, but on the other hand,
but it's like it's more of an intuition thing.
Right. It's one of those.
If I could fact check them here, why would I give them the time of day elsewhere?
Yeah. And I do happen to know that since then you have actually fact checked them on a fair bit of biology, because we've done some of that together, and oh boy, is it bad.
Yeah, I mean, I knew that it would probably be a good idea to like look at it at some point, but it just didn't bother me, because if I've already know these guys are unreliable, it's like, what do I care?
Yeah,
I'm sure they've got excuses for it, and I'm sure there's problems with it, but it wasn't at that point. It wasn't just a priority of mine.
Okay, all right. Well, that's interesting, because I find I would have expected most people who got out of young Earth creationism by being convinced that the Earth is old would end up as old Earth creationists for at least a considerable amount of time. In fact, I know some old Earth creationists who were young Earth creationists, but then things like basically like the reasons to believe type stuff, like Hugh Ross on like the age of the universe and things like that. Those are the kinds of things that got them out of YEC. But then they go into this sort of like progressive creation, sort of old Earth creation.
I suppose part of it was, I mean, because I did take a brief look at like things like the day age theory and whatnot, and it just did not feel like an intuitive reading to me. And like, I'm 15, so I'm not going to be going too terribly in depth with that, and it just really didn't interest me. I knew that obviously the young Earth creationism interpretation wasn't scientifically tenable. I didn't really understand what that meant for the rest of my faith. And I think I was a bit too young to really be getting in that deep about it. So there was a little bit of suppression. And it was really just, I mean, even to this day, I haven't entirely figured it out. I'm sorry, what was the question? My train of thought just kind of left.
No, it was just a commentary on the fact that I know of some young Earth creationists who, upon realizing the Earth and the universe have to be old, spent a considerable amount of time as old Earth creationists. And it was interesting that you didn't take that trajectory. Whereas,
yeah, that's right. Well, my dad was one, but we didn't have books on it. We didn't have a whole lot of resources, and my church wasn't putting it out there, so there was no one I could really go to. And my dad, although he's smart, wasn't that read in on it. And in fact, it wasn't until he was actually surprisingly easy to turn into a theistic evolutionist too. Because I remember after all of this had happened, I was like 17 by this point. We were down in the Keys on some like summer vacation trip, just me and him. And I had brought a copy of Finding Darwin's God by Ken Miller. and he looked through it, and he ended up just reading the whole thing in about 2 days.
Wow.
And he was actually really intrigued by it. And I was sitting there on one of the hotel beds just doing something on my laptop, and he comes out from outside where he was reading. He's like, "Hey Colton, did you know that in reptiles there's these bones in the jaw that moved in us to become our inner ear?" And I was like, "Yeah, I know. That's pretty cool." He's like, "Oh, this is so awesome." And that was the end of it for him. He saw the evidence and he changed his mind. So,
Nice.
No real struggle, no real fight there.
Yeah. Well, I think that is. There are a lot of people I think who are young Earth creationists just because it's never been important enough to check in on, and I get that. Like, look, if you're working your job and you're, supporting a family, and you go to church every Sunday, and that's part of your community and whatever. What? I understand why looking into technical papers on geology and biological evolution is not going to be what you want to fill your time with.
Yeah, I can understand that.
Okay, fine. That's why I don't really have a problem with the average Joe who, is just like, I'm just a guy, I go to church every week, and, my church is a Young Earth Creationist church, and
I work in the Department of Water and Power. I mean, that's my life.
Right. Like, okay, fine. You're not what I see as the problem, because I see Young Earth Creationism as sort of like it's almost like and this is an overused cliche, but it is sort of like an intellectual cancer, right? Mm-hmm. But those people, they are the victims of this. And for the most part, they're victims who are not suffering overly much from it. On the other hand, the perpetrators of this and the people who are turning away what would otherwise be people who could contribute valuable, I can't say words.
Valuable.
Yes, that could contribute in a valuable manner. There you go. I'm going to try to get rid of the adjectival suffix. Get out of here. So the people who could contribute in a valuable manner, who are being turned away from being actual scientists. Like, I'm sure that Nathaniel Jeanson or Georgia Purdom or whoever could probably have actually done some good work if they hadn't been convinced to be intellectually dishonest in support of a religiously motivated perversion of science.
Yeah, I suppose that I don't know if you've ever heard the story of Kurt Wise, but do you know who he is?
I do know the name. He is
what a lot of people call the honest creationist, and I agree with that assessment because Kurt Wise understands that evolution is not poopy like poppycock. I mean, it's not horrible.
Oh yeah, you're right. I've seen some of his.
Todd Wood is also another one of these guys who believes that evolution has evidence to support it. And Kurt Wise actually trained under Stephen Jay Gould at Harvard, I believe, as a paleontologist, and he took like geology courses with Gould. And Gould, I mean, for as much as you hear, secular teachers always hate the young Earth creationist students, they've got that like persecution complex. It's well known that Stephen Jay Gould actually bit back at his secular students for bullying Kurt Wise for his young Earth creationist beliefs. He did not tolerate it. He was very protective. They actually had a very close bond. It's really wholesome, actually. But Kurt Wise said that when he was realizing that all this like old Earth geology was interfering with his young Earth creationist convictions, he sat there one night with a pair of scissors and a Bible, and he cut out every verse he could find that would have to be gotten rid of if young Earth creationism wasn't true. And he said that by the time he was done with it, the Bible had so little left in it that it fell apart. And which is really sad. And if you actually listen to him tell this story, he tears up when he's talking about this. And I can kind of relate to the feeling. But then he talks about how he knew in that moment that he was going to have to throw his academic career and any hopes of being a scientist or being a teacher into the garbage. Just right into the fire pit. It's gone because he could not give up his belief in God. It was too important to him. And it's really sad because, and I'm frankly lucky that I broke out of the young Earth creationist science thing and wasn't too attached to it being an integral part of my beliefs in God, which are shaky for different reasons. Because I can't imagine my life going that route, just throwing away any chance of like having an actual active career for that, just for like some core belief. It's a really sad story. You should honestly look it up.
That is
It almost makes me tear up thinking about it because I can relate to that kind of like, ooh, that doesn't feel good.
No, yeah, that's a rough time. I'm personally of the opinion though that the core tenets of Christianity are not necessarily in conflict with either evolution or an old Earth, and I know there are a lot of people who disagree with me on that.
Yeah, I mean, I would disagree with him on that too. With like, I need to absolutely cut out these verses. But at the end of the day, if he was really convinced that the young Earth hermeneutics are the only valid way to read Scripture, I can't really blame him for going that route.
There's certainly a hermeneutical standpoint that maintains a fair degree of there's a coherent story they're telling. I would say there are some problems internally with the text where they're cherry picking which parts they want to be overly literal about, and to some degree, but at least the narrative as a whole.
And it's not all like, it's actually kind of funny because for as much as they butcher geology and biology and paleontology and all these other fields, when it comes to biblical hermeneutics, they're actually not the worst with it. I definitely think they have problems, but that is absolutely what their skill set is in. Which I guess would make sense given they are very fundamentalist, strict Christians. You would expect them to take their interpretations of Scripture extremely seriously.
Yeah. Actually, one place I have seen young Earth creationists do fairly well in terms of actual scholarship and fact-checking is New Testament textual studies with higher criticism. Actually, I've seen some young Earth creationists do some fairly rigorous work in that area, comparing manuscripts and looking at textual variants and trying to figure out, ironically enough, a nested hierarchy as a result of common descent with modification of New Testament manuscripts. Because one of the reasons that manuscripts of the New Testament fall into families is because they are imperfect copies of previous manuscripts, which, wouldn't you know it, results in a nested hierarchy where you can tell that there was an ancestor manuscript with these characteristics that you don't have. Because you can tell that, at this point, some scribe made this error and it continued on into these manuscripts. And then of this subset, we have one subset that has this other scribal error and another subset that has this other one. And so it's interesting because New Testament manuscripts do actually fall into something that looks a whole lot like the Tree of Life, which I've yet to see any of the young Earth textual critics, but I can't talk, of the New Testament, who acknowledge that completely, ever make the leap to say, well, hey, this is completely, maps onto an evolutionary model for common descent in exactly the same way, but, why bother to follow through on that line of thought? Which actually, I don't know how I would do it, and I've tried to get a little bit of it done, but I would like to do some kind of project about that, where I can find someone who's well into the textual history of the New Testament and have them explain in depth how we know the various manuscript families and then compare it to evolutionary relationships.
That would honestly be really cool.
It would. And also, this is a little bit off topic. I won't go there yet. But I guess my next question is, and this is a question I often ask a lot of the guests, is how do you feel about the people whose work you were reading and finding compelling when you were a young Earth creationist? How do you feel about those people now?
That's an interesting question. I don't really have that much animosity towards people like Steve Austin. I don't think he's the most honest guy when it comes to it, but I mean, he's one of those people that honestly, Snelling's a bit of a different case, but with people like Steve Austin, I can't tell where to draw the line between, is it deliberate deception of other people, or have they deceived themselves into thinking they're actually doing honest work? Now, you compare that to people like John Woodmarap, and how he just flagrantly abuses the literature. He quotes papers saying one thing when they actually say something else. Yeah, I don't like people like Woodmarab. Like, I can't even pretend to have like a good sentiment towards them. I mean, I don't wish them ill will, but that would not be a pleasant conversation to have in person.
Yeah.
Same with like Snelling. You know, when Snelling takes pictures of those folds in the Tapete sandstone, and he says there's no stress fractures evident, and he has put people in front of the visible stress fractures. I don't know what to say about that. That's one that I don't really think I can dismiss as just intellectual deception of himself. I think that's probably actually a deliberate attempt to deceive. It's just a little too convenient that they're put right there.
Right. Well, he's also been known to be dishonest about his intended collection method when collecting samples from the Grand Canyon. That's why he was initially denied research access for a second trip there, which he then successfully sued to overturn. But the reason wasn't because he was a young Earth creationist. He was approved with everyone knowing that. What it turns out was that people noticed that the collection methods that he claimed he was going to use the last time were not the collection methods he used in that particular trip to the Grand Canyon to collect samples.
And you have to make sure that you're following very specific procedures, because you can't just start breaking up anything you want in a national park.
Right. Technically, it is illegal to remove rocks from a national park at all. If you're in any national park, and
the law.
Okay, look. My guess is that if you're just some guy on the trail and you kick a rock and you think it looks cool, so you pick it up and you put it in your pocket, I don't think they're going to haul you off to federal prison or anything, right?
I don't know, man. It was from Mount St. Helens. Maybe I'll get in trouble. And it was more than one.
Still, however, if you want to publish on these rocks, which of course you would if you were a geologist, you better have everything straight. You better have your collection methods, your your map where you've found your samples, all that stuff. And you know what? If you intentionally go in, use a different sampling method, then there isn't any good reason why you should be allowed access again.
So I guess to answer the question in a more concise way, some of them, I view almost all of them with a veneer of distrust at this point. Some of them, I like, especially like Kurt Wise, I feel nothing but empathy for, because I can understand that. But then there's people like Snelling and Woodmarab who I do have negative feelings towards.
Okay.
I don't want to say I hate them, but I really don't like them, and seeing their work just bothers me, because it's always more of the same.
Yeah. I've actually been having increasingly negative feelings towards certain quote unquote paleontologists in the Young Earth movement, shall we say, whose shoddy methods are
sawing bones open in the middle of the field
with a plaster cast already on them. Yep. Which, by the way, I don't know if you know this about plaster, but it'll contaminate your samples. Because my guess is that you didn't mix sterile plaster in a sterile environment. I'm just going to go out and say that that's probably not what happened.
Yeah.
So it's. Yep. So anyway, we won't get too far on that. So now that you're out, has this been a source of friction between you and any friends or family members or anything? Is it something you talk about?
Well, I mean, my father got divorced from his wife, so that whole bit of the fundamentalist step family is gone. They're out of the picture.
Okay.
My mom's side of the family are almost all agnostics, so it didn't really bother them. My dad's side of the family was a bit more fundamentalist religious, and it was kind of an area of friction, especially because I started leaving like Christianity in general. That was more of the problem. But we eventually just learned not to talk about it. My dad obviously has completely come around to the theistic evolution view, so there's no problem. And he'll actually call me downstairs sometimes to show me some like Answers in Genesis video that he found, and he's just laughing his ass off at it.
Yeah, actually, there's been some discussion of the last AIG live stream they had. Did you see that?
No.
It was our birds dinosaurs, and I was in the comments countering every single claim in real time because they were all ludicrously wrong.
God, that's beautiful. The real friction that happened was actually to do with my church.
Okay.
15 and when I was fact checking it. Because Chuck was the guy who was like the youth counselor, and he was always like really cool, I guess, at least as cool as a church youth counselor can be. And he wasn't like going down the thing of like, man, Jesus is rad. No, he wasn't doing that kind of angle, because if he was God, he would have been bullied mercilessly. But he was just the guy that's like, anytime you walk in, he's like, hey, brother, how's your walk with Jesus going? And it's like, okay, it's a comfy vibe. I'll roll with it. But when he and I got into some discussions about, like, I would read claims that just like weren't true in the book, in the magazines and stuff that they had, and I'd go up to him like, hey, they're claiming that there's no erosional unconformities with deep channeling in the Grand Canyon, and I got a picture of it on my phone. It's here. What do you want to say about this? Like, why are they telling us this? And it didn't go that well. I got yelled at on a couple of occasions. And eventually they said, if you want to keep doing these and raising these questions, and I wasn't raising questions like in the middle of the youth group service. I guess it was just stuff they weren't prepared to handle. They're like, we don't need this kind of energy here. You can either be quiet about it or you can go elsewhere. And I just told my dad, look, I'm not comfortable with being in the youth groups anymore. And he was like, okay, then you don't have to go. And that was the end of it.
Well, it's good that he was supportive there, because that's,
Yeah.
I know that at one point the church my family was going to they were going to it specifically because my parents thought that the youth program was pretty good. So, however, I did have some negative experiences with the youth program regarding evolution, unsurprisingly enough. So,
yeah.
Yeah, but I assume you're not going to that church anymore. So
no, I haven't been to church other than, I go to Catholic Mass because my dad is a confirmed Catholic. So I'll go with him sometimes. Mostly we go with my grandfather, because ever since his wife of 60 years died last year, he's been going to Mass a lot more. So if I'm ever like down there at his farm with him and a Sunday rolls around, we go to a Sunday, or we actually go to a Saturday night Mass usually.
Okay. Well, after sundown, it's Sunday as far as the ecclesiastical calendar is concerned.
Yeah. So we go to those like Saturday night Masses sometimes if I'm ever down there with him. But other than that, I don't really go to church. It's not a big deal.
Well, so it sounds like it's no longer a source of any real friction in your life then. So that's good.
Not really.
Yeah.
People ask, like, well, why do you stay involved in this then if it seems like a settled issue to you? Entertainment, honestly.
Yeah, it is entertaining. That's one of the reasons I do it. I also do think there's some value in countering nonsense. Yeah. Is it as important as countering, say, medical nonsense, like Miles Power or Jeff Holiday that they're doing? No, probably not. I'm probably not going to save anyone's life by saying, hey, evolution totally real, though. Like, it's sure, probably not. But on the other hand, I do think that accuracy and scientific knowledge are important for their own sake.
I think it's important to be an open-minded person when it comes to this topic, simply because there are a lot of people, especially more and more, because we've got the internet now, it's fact-checking is incredibly easy. Just be ready. Don't be nasty to any creationist you see, because a lot of them are coming forward with questions that they need answers to, and I like to view it as a chance to just extend a hand and maybe pull them out if they're willing to take it. For example, the few times I've corresponded with young Earth creationist authors, it hasn't been nasty, but it's been very curt. Meanwhile, old Earth creationist authors like Gary Lachelt or just secular geologists like Kevin Henke are more than happy to converse with me and help me on any topic I need help with, as long as it's within their field of expertise. And you don't get that from the young Earth creationist community, or at least I didn't. And it was part of what made it easier, the transition easier, was seeing that kind of dynamic. Yeah. The fact that a lot of creationist authors aren't willing to extend that same hand of, oh, you need help getting this source? Here you go. But the horrible evolutionist side was, and they were a lot kinder. I mean, Gary Lachelt, God bless that man. He bought me like He bought me a couple of the International Conference for Creationism books because I didn't have the money for them, just so that we could talk about them together and talk about the different papers, so we could have a whole discussion on catastrophic plate tectonics.
Wow.
So, yeah, I mean, that's the kind of thing that I had people get. Meanwhile, there was a time when I was looking into some argument about 14 carbon and dinosaurs, and I reached out to Brian Thomas, who was one of the authors, and was like, hey, can I get a copy of your paper because I can't afford to buy the Creation Research Society thing? And I didn't get a response. I ended up getting that paper, but we're not going to talk about how.
All right, then.
The person who helped me asked me to not say.
Fair enough. I won't ask. That doesn't sound shady at all. Yeah. So that is actually one of the things that I've noticed is that while young Earth creationists like to very quickly try to hop on that moral high horse, and the thing that always comes to mind for me is Ken Hovind saying like, oh, was it really the evidence that convinced you, or was it maybe something else? And then he's heavily implying that you're some kind of sexual pervert weirdo for believing in evolution, because it means that.
No, that was before I left creationism. But that's off topic.
But yeah, like it's this weird thing, because then you look at, okay, well, how do creationists behave in their interactions about these, fact claims? And you get people like, well, quite frankly, like Nephilim Free or like Kent Hovind, who are just absolutely vitriolic. And sure, they might not curse a lot. Okay, that doesn't really make it any better. And you get, or sometimes you get things that are absolutely vulgar, like I can't talk again. Like the comment that I shared to my Twitter and the channel's Facebook page recently, which is, I mean, it was amusing to some extent in how ridiculous.
Yeah, I had to think for a second which one you were referring to, but yeah, I remember that one.
Yeah, if someone can link my last tweet in case anyone hasn't seen it.
Frankly, I need to consider YouTube comment creationists are not real people. I am convinced they are either bots of some sort or they are a completely different, not human life form.
Yeah, well, for the sake of my sanity, I would like to think that. I do,
because I genuinely don't think if you argue in the YouTube comments, I can consider you like a sentient being, because it's the YouTube comments section. Well, it doesn't matter.
Honestly, that video I did with Erica, Kent Hovind is a coward, that drew in so many wonderful trolls. I can't pin enough of the comments, because one of the things I like to do is if someone makes an ass of themselves in the comments, I like to pin it. So that everyone who goes to my comment section can see my stupidest comments, which I actually happen to know there are a few other channels that do things like that.
By the way, if you're covering things about bird evolution, since I've got this Creationism, this International Conference of Creationism thing, it is from 1990, so it's not their most ultimate thing. But
changed.
Yeah, there's a paper in here by Ian Taylor, this past creationist peer review, called The Ultimate Hoax, Archaeopteryx lithographica.
Oh, is that about the whole, like, Archaeopteryx was made by putting cement onto a fossil and pressing chicken feathers into it and all that ridiculousness?
Yep.
Oh, man. I love that one. If you haven't seen Hello, My Name is Kent Hovind, it's a series by Logic. He has one of his more recent episodes, because he stopped making them for quite a while, actually goes over the whole fake Archaeopteryx thing. I believe the episode is titled Fakeopteryx, and it is a pretty good takedown of that whole thing, because it stems from this study that was headed up by, of all people, Fred Hoyle, who was a self-professed atheist creationist somehow. That was a thing that he was. He seemed to think that there was some kind of extraterrestrial intelligence that guided life on Earth, and the common descent was just hokum or something. Like,
isn't there that what was that guy's name? I know RJ likes to talk about him a lot. Like that one young Earth creationist atheist.
Oh, there is one?
Yeah, what was his name? Damn it, I can't recall. RJ brings him up all the time.
We'll have to ask him.
The poster child for just being a horrible source methods guy.
We'll have to ask him because I've never heard of Hoyle. At least was an old. He was actually an eternal universe creationist. He didn't actually think the universe had a beginning. So,
Fred Hoyle. Oh yeah, he was that guy. Wasn't he also one of those panspermia advocates?
I believe he was. Yeah.
And what's funny about Hoyle is, damn, he got it right on the stellar nucleosynthesis.
Oh yeah, I mean his nuclear physics were. That's one of the things is you can do good work while having crazy beliefs. I mean, it's possible. And Fred Hoyle did do some good work. He is the person who proposed what is now the dominant theory around nucleosynthesis, at least up to iron.
Yeah.
Since going past iron, we've had to invoke somewhat more extreme events. Not extreme in the sense of unlikely to exist, but just extreme in terms of energy levels.
Yeah, like things like gamma ray explosions, right?
Yeah, like gamma ray bursts, supernovae.
Or when the fact that you've got these instances where two neutron stars can merge together, and it like creates elements from just the sheer amount of force that's given out with that, I think is one of them.
Yeah, so it's not the only manner that we get heavier elements than basically lithium, because you can get some direct lithium just out of like the Big Bang. Not a whole lot, but it can be there. It's vanishingly small, but you get almost all hydrogen, tiny bits of helium here and there, and then every once in a very great while you get, there's a little lithium sprinkled in there. But anything higher than that, we're getting from these collapses of stars and late stage in the star's life cycle as a star, fusing carbon and helium and all these things. So yeah, he was good on that. But he and a few other people published this article proclaiming Archaeopteryx to be a fake, or the feathers to be fake. He thought the skeleton was real. And they published it in a photography journal. He published it in a photography journal because, of course, you publish your paleontology work in photography journals, right? Isn't that how you do it? That's standard practice for paleontologists. And basically, he said that the fossil was forged by spreading thin cement over the areas where you can see the feathers and then pressing chicken feathers into the cement and then letting it dry, as if no one had checked to see if the area around the feathers was composed of the same stone as the slab and counter slab. His other point was, well, the counter slab doesn't have the feather impressions. It's like, yeah, because that was the surface that was already relatively hard that the animal fell onto.
Yep. They cite Hoyle in this paper. What's also funny is that one of the comments on the back is from Kurt Wise, and he says, Mr. Taylor's paper not only lacks compelling evidence to demonstrate that Archaeopteryx was a forged fossil, but presents sufficient evidence to argue for its authenticity.
Nice. Oh, man, that's great. That is great. Yeah, Kurt Wise, maybe he's one of the professional level creationists that I might actually like. Because that is really good, and it's just it's so bad. But I am probably going to
love to reach out to him and just like have a talk with him.
That would be great, actually.
I don't know how we can facilitate that, and I certainly don't want to give standing anymore publicity.
I mean, we could probably just have him on my channel or Guts at Gibbons' channel or something like that. I mean,
because what I wouldn't want to take it from a like any sort of just trying to debunk him kind of thing. I would like to talk to him about his views on whale evolution, frankly.
Yeah.
And how does that fit in with a post-flood time frame and like with the flood boundary? And that could be an interesting conversation to at least like pick at his brain.
Yeah. I mean, maybe we should just email him.
Honestly, I wouldn't mind.
Well, let's talk about that in our little group chat that we have going on that the audience can't be in because you're not special enough. But honestly, it's mostly just because we've already got like 5 people in there, and if you've ever been in group chats with 5 people, it can already get a little crazy.
I already need to rename it because we have 6 now.
Oh, do we have 6 now?
Yeah.
Oh yeah, we do. All right. Well, that's starting to get kind of crazy right there. So yeah, but we should discuss that because I think that might be fun. So I think right now I'm going to open this up to questions, and so the TD Lane. How am I hurting you?
Don't worry. Maybe we can get him in as the 7th. Just
Oh, because he's not special enough. I got it.
Yeah.
So the way that we do questions, in case this is your first one of these, is I read questions generally in the order that they are asked. But
None.
if you
No nudes are posted.
yeah, there's the answer to that question. So try to tag me with at Dapper Dinosaur if you want, or sorry, at Dapper Dino if you want the question asked, because otherwise there's a fair chance I'll miss it. But also, if you super chat, that will bump your question up to the absolute top. So if you really want to make sure that your question gets in, send it along with a super chat, because I will be reading those off if we get any first. And if we don't get through the questions, we don't. If we do, we do. So here we go. Let's see. This is for me, I guess. How do you add your intro to your live streams through StreamYard? I basically stopped trying. When I stream using OBS, I do it via OBS as a scene change, and I don't even try on StreamYard. I might try to figure it out someday, but I just didn't. Let's see. So this is from TD Lane. To both of us, what was the most interesting geologic or what is the most interesting geologic formation in your opinion?
I would take a look at this Carboniferous deposit in it's from Ireland, and I like it because it's this massive deposit of fusane, which for those who don't know is basically just fossilized charcoal. And the authors who found it did like a really minimum estimate of how much there has to be in this area by looking at certain outcrops, and tried to calculate how, even if we're conservative, how big did the wildfire that caused this have to be? And it would have to be a wildfire that at one time was burning and covering more surface area than the entire nation of Ireland combined.
Ooh.
It was a giant wildfire deposit, and I think it's really cool to see how back in the Carboniferous fires could get to that size, because there's just so much oxygen in the air.
Right. Okay. And we actually had a question that I made sure to note down earlier, which, by the way, hey guys, hit like before you head out of here. Only got 29 likes. We got 52 people here. Come on, step it up. But actually, we had a question from Trim Tarask, who I'm hoping is currently hibernating and not on a rampage, but it's hard to tell with him. He always asks this question, but he couldn't stay for the whole talk. So his question is, how do you feel about pineapple on pizza?
Dude, that's like one of my favorite pizzas, and I will actually fight to the death anyone who wants to argue with me on that one.
Well, there you go. Let's see. From Dan Curtis, how does Colton feel about students who study young Earth creationism currently?
Good for them. Honestly, I hope they get out of it. I hope they see what's wrong with it sooner or later, but that's their responsibility.
Okay. This is from Gutsick Gibbon, our mutual friend. For Colton, if you had to pick between Woodmarap and Snelling to be stuck on a desert island with, who and why?
I would pick Woodmarap simply because when we inevitably start arguing about how many bananas there actually are, I can argue that he's just cherry picking and I'm throwing away all the bananas that he's eaten. And
okay.
He's stealing my food source.
All right. I like that answer. Let's see. This is from Eric Viertaler 92. Question for Colton. Does he think Behemoth... sorry.
I'm guessing that says, what do I think Behemoth and Leviathan are?
Yeah. Let's see. Was the flood local or mythical, and does the Bible teach flat Earth?
I'm going to answer that in reverse order. I don't know if the Bible teaches flat Earth strictly. I know there are some references to it, and I know that we have pretty good reason to think that the ancient Jewish cosmology was sort of a flat Earth with a firmament. But I don't really know if you should consider that to be a direct teaching of Scripture, as instead of just like a kind of detail of what they also believe because everyone else around them believed the same thing. That just kind of got brought in with it. The other question, do Do I believe the flood was local or mythical? I would say a mix of both. We do know that there are some massive flood deposits from the Iraqi floodplain area that probably relate to like where this myth came from. I don't really subscribe to the whole Black Sea flooding thing. For my mythologies class and comparative religions class that I did like 2 semesters ago, I actually wrote a paper for like my final essay response that was about the Black Sea flooding and why I thought it didn't line up with the geologic evidence for and the archaeological evidence for what was like the start of Noah's flood. And then there's also the fact that we know that the Israelites took a lot of stuff from the Babylonians when they were in captivity, and they like took a lot of their stories and said, "Ha, you think it's all these pathetic, wimpy individual gods who all have to help each other? Well, we got one, and he's the biggest dick god out there, and he can do it all by himself." But to be fair, I mean, I would love to have that attitude about my god too. So it's a mix.
Okay.
Inspired by a local event, but probably also taken from somebody else's stories that are based on a real thing that happened.
And I realized that
and the Behemoth and Leviathan.
Right.
Erica has a good video about these and how they're most likely mythical creatures. I definitely don't think they're a dinosaur because I don't see how a sauropod can fit in the Nile River and hide its head under lotus lilies.
Yeah, that doesn't make a whole lot of sense.
That's what it's described as doing.
I do realize that I've neglected to answer a question that was asked of me, and then I'm going to go to our super chat, and then we're going to continue on, which was, what's your favorite geological formation? So I actually have different answers depending on what kind of thing I'm looking at. In terms of saying, hey, what gives flood geology? I would say any of the large evaporite deposits that you can find around the world, because it's extremely hard to explain how you would get a deposit left by evaporating water while you're underwater.
For those who want to look at a good evaporite formation, I would seriously look up the Castile Formation in the Delaware Basin. It's a massive, actually, salt varve deposit that was formed in a very unique environment. We don't really have a modern version of it happening today, actualism. And it's basically a set of varves. I can't remember how many there are, but they're really tranquil and they cover a really large basin. And it indicates that we had a very calm sea that was just slowly evaporating and leaving behind like annual salt layers, and then it would periodically be recharged by seawater because its chemistry indicated that it received like next to no rain or any river water from the continents. Yeah, really cool. So if you like evaporites, look up the Castile Formation and all like the geochemistry of it. It's really awesome.
All right. For fossil bearing, I have a bit of a fondness for the Painted Desert out in the American Southwest. Yeah. Yeah, just because you can see really cool fossils without really trying, and they're very obvious. You can just walk into it and be like, oh, look, that's a fossilized lycopod tree. Right there. There it is. So
is that the one with all the tree fossils everywhere?
It has the petrified forest, and it also extends well into the Triassic. So you can see pretty much the entirety of the Triassic in the various strata in the Painted Desert.
Oh, somebody corrected me here. The individual Castile varves extend for up to 90 kilometers. Yeah, if you want to see a really cool evaporite basin, look that up.
That is pretty cool. And then in terms of just visiting for spectacle, it's hard for me to beat just having gone to the Grand Canyon with Bent Hovend. Not that well, it's a fair few months ago now, but less than a year ago. That was pretty wild just in terms of spectacle and awe-inspiring vastness of geological formation. So those are the three answers I'm going to give there. Oddly enough, none of them really have anything to do with dinosaurs, despite my avatar and my general interest in that particular clade. But whatever. So now our super chat, which is for $5 from Vandalia 1998, who asks, Colton, how did your love of geology affect your journey, and how do you feel about Americans chopping up the Carboniferous?
Always that one. Being attached to geology, how did it affect my journey? I'm trying to think of like a good way to phrase it. I feel like it forced me to stay empirical because I could not stick with the hand-waving excuses. The vague claims of the flood could do that, because if I couldn't give an honest, coherent explanation for what's beneath my very feet, that's kind of harder to, like, the rocks are all around me. It's not like it's some fossil that's locked up in a museum that I've never seen. It's everywhere. And so it forced me to actually take it pretty seriously and not just dismiss things as, well, somebody else can handle that. As for the Carboniferous thing, I don't really have too much of an opinion on it. I think it's kind of annoying. I wish we would just stick to it being just the Carboniferous and call it either early or late. But I understand that it comes from the different types of deposits that are known in on the North American continent from that time period. So breaking it up, I wouldn't say is completely unjustified, but I don't know.
If it makes you feel any better, different, what is it? It's epochs within the Mesozoic periods are given different names and different time horizons in different parts of the world, which can make it a little bit complicated, because you're like, all right, so this is this period in North America, and that corresponds to what time in East Asia?
I mean, I remember that I did something on Vandalia's show of like a month or two ago, and one of the things that was interesting about that was I found out that apparently, like, the Ordovician was not accepted globally as a period until like 1996. There were still a few holdouts who were saying it wasn't a real thing, and it wasn't until they finally conceded that it like got accepted.
Interesting.
They weren't taken very seriously, but that's just an interesting little blip. Most people were using it, but there were some people who were saying no, that's not real.
We have a question from The Leaping Bear. What is the most convincing argument anyone has ever tried for you on the global flood, if any? So I'll let you go ahead, and then if I have a different one, I'll chime in.
Oh, what is the most convincing argument? I would honestly say their whole carbon-14 thing that they have going on, because if you actually look at the nitty details, it's not anything like they talk about. But they did make a convincing case to me at first of, hey, look, not only is there all this anomalous radiocarbon, but it no matter what time period you're looking in, supposedly, it gives roughly the same age, like 4,500 roughly across the board, which would be consistent with everything existing in one pre-flood biosphere at the same time. And I was like, okay, yeah, that could make a pretty decent argument. But then I actually looked at the data, and it didn't actually show that.
Right. And I think one of the things is that every argument I've heard has ultimately failed badly. So it's hard to pick which one was the best.
Yeah, but I mean, at the time, I would say stuff like that seemed to like click intuitively. Yeah,
I would say, just from an initial hearing, without having bothered to look into it, one of the ones I always found interesting was the supposedly widespread nature of flood myths sharing details of Noah's flood. It turns out that is much exaggerated by creationists, but in the way they present it, it does sound like one of those things. Well, that is odd. Like, why should all of these disparate cultures have these various similarities? Then you look into it and you realize, oh well, many of these cultures didn't. We don't really have any evidence they had these stories prior to extensive contact with Christians, or that in other cases, like, no, there are actually lots of cultures that don't really have big flood myths. Or in other cases, we find out that their flood myths really don't have any terribly significant similarities. But I never really found very many of the physical arguments about the actual geology of the Earth or the biology terribly convincing, because they all seem, basically almost all of them end up in everyone die scenarios if you take them seriously.
Yeah.
So,
one of the things that I found weird when I was looking at that flood stories thing was there's an article on creation.com that supposedly is reporting like an Australian Aboriginal myth that is extremely close to the biblical story. And they claim that there's never been any missionaries to transmit that. And I was like, okay, that's kind of convincing. But when I tried to find a source, like some extra creation.com reporting of this myth, I could find tons of Australian myths about floods, but it was like clearly tsunamis or local floods, and people survived on the mountains, so the mountains never got completely covered. But this one that was really close, you could not find on anything but a creationist website. No source was given for it. I still haven't found it to this day, and I keep looking for it every few months.
I'm sure creationists would never make up a myth whole cloth.
To me, I think what it is it's either a creationist researcher claims he did this originally, so he's the one who discovered it, or it could just be completely made up. But it does not seem to have been reported by anyone else anywhere. And I checked a couple of different books on like Australian myths, and I asked my mythologies professor, who likes talking about the Aborigines. He'd had no idea what I was talking about.
All right. We have from Dussel Drace at Colton. Have you come across the work of nuclear physicist Robert Hayes? Mass diffusion is a quality control issue for radiocarbon dating, including isochrons. 2017, noteworthy but not ground shaking.
Robert Hayes? No, haven't heard of this.
Okay, I haven't either, so I'm not sure.
If you want to post a link to the paper in the comments, I'll take a look at it. I would have sent it to Irvin Taylor, who was a radiocarbon guy who helped me with a lot of these radiocarbon issues. And he helped me like fact check stuff, but he died back in 2019. So I don't know who really to bring it up to at this point.
Okay. We have from Aowen. I'm not really sure exactly how to say the name. I'm sorry. What is each of your favorite organism? And that's a tough one, but
Bottlenose dolphins.
Okay, that's easy for you. I'm not sure really, because I'm someone who tends not to have a favorite in a broad category. Like, what's your favorite food? It's like that's too broad. I don't have a single favorite food. There's no food that I want to have for the rest of my life. And when it comes to organisms, it's sort of the same thing. Like, what would be my ideal pet is not the same thing as what would be the ideal thing for me to see in a zoo, which is not the same thing as like what's my favorite extinct vertebrate, all that stuff. So it's a really hard question for me to answer. It really varies by mood. Yeah, sometimes it's my favorite dinosaur is Meleagris scalopapa. So I'll give you that, which in case you don't know is the North American turkey. And it's my favorite dinosaur. It is my favorite dinosaur because it is absolutely delicious and it is my favorite kind of poultry. So there you go. I'll just go with that. Yep. I'm quite fond of porcupines, mostly because I think that they have a lifestyle worth emulating, which is to say they go about their business. They don't attack anyone. They don't try to be assholes to anyone. But on the other hand, if you want to try and mess with them, they're like, nope, not going to deal with that. You're just going to get a face full of quills. I don't have time for that. So I think that if that were more people's attitude, which is, you know what? Don't cause waves with anyone. Don't try to go around being a jerk to anyone, but be fully capable of defending yourself in the face of attack. I think the world would probably be a better place. So I do like that. It's probably my favorite rodent is the North American porcupine. Also because, you know, it's the kind of thing I can go out and see. It's pretty hard for me to go find any African porcupines or those weird, like, prehensile-tailed South American porcupines. So let's see. This is from Titanus the Titagraptor. At Deborah Dino, if Archaeopteryx was fake, really fake, then how do you explain Microraptor, Eutyrannus, and other feathered dinos? Yeah, that's one of the crazy things. Is like, even if Hoyle had proved beyond any shadow of a doubt that Archaeopteryx find was fake, okay, sure.
It's all fake. That's the point. It is so. Here's the thing. It is such an elaborate conspiracy. I mean, if it was a perfect conspiracy to conceive the world, do you think they'd leave evidence that it is a conspiracy? No. The lack of evidence is the evidence. Checkmate.
We have from Dan Curtis. Colton says his faith in God is shaky. Can you briefly explain why, please? And I will say, I do not require guests to talk about their current religious beliefs. They are, however, allowed to. So you can choose whether or not you would like to answer that.
It's kind of a personal thing, but I mean, I like everyone here enough to, I guess, go into it a little bit. It doesn't have much to do with creation and evolution. because I was never too attached to that being like a required part of my faith. And it really doesn't have to do with like the issues of historicity either. I haven't really looked into those, and if I'm honest, it doesn't really interest me. What belief in God I do have comes from just sort of a gut intuition that I fully recognize could just be nothing more than that. But there have been some family troubles in my life, especially regarding my mother, that make me question whether or not either a God is there or it is something I need to be trusting. For example, she killed herself, and I'm pretty sure I was to blame for it. So yeah, that kind of makes me iffy on what exactly we're doing, what this God is doing, if it's actually something that's there.
Okay.
Sorry to kill the mood.
Well, that is a bit of a downer. Maybe this will help lift it up a bit, because our next question is from Eric Virtaler92, who asks, are you more of a dog person or a cat person? And are you a fan of the Jurassic Park franchise?
I like Jurassic Park. Not my favorite series in the world, but it's definitely something I enjoy watching, especially the Jurassic Park rides that are down in Florida at like Universal Studios. Oh, it's beautiful. I'm a dog person because my grandparents, like my dad's parents, actually owned a German Shepherd puppy farm. So most of my childhood, from like 4 to 15 years old, before they stopped actually breeding puppies, was literally being surrounded by about 12 German Shepherds at any one time, and God knows however many puppies that they also happened to have. It was beautiful.
Nice. All right, and let's see what else we got. Let's see. Sorry, I just lost my place. Okay, here we go. This is from Vesta Freya. This is for both of us. For me, the most interesting geological formation would have to be the Burgess Shale, just a few hours west of me. I guess it's not a question, but yeah, that is a really good one.
God, that's so cool.
Yeah, the Burgess Shale is pretty awesome. For those who don't know, it is one of the best Cambrian fossil beds.
I think Don Prothero has a really good book that talks about it.
Okay.
Or at least in part.
Let's see. This is from... Oh, I think I just scrolled past it. Come on, YouTube. What are you doing to me? Yeah, okay, here it is. This is from Dan Curtis. Dapper Dino, for you, are there any good defenses for the way dinosaurs are modeled are at the Ark Encounter with no feathers? So that is an interesting thing that I'm going to give you a little bit of a preview of something I'm going to start working on pretty soon. Because as has already been referenced in the chat, there was a recent stream, by recent I think I mean yesterday, on the Answers in Genesis, who run the Ark Encounter and the Creation Museum, about whether or not birds are dinosaurs, which of course is going to get into feathers and dinosaurs. Well, famously, there are dromaeosaurs, which are the raptor dinosaurs, like Dakota raptor, velociraptor, Utah raptor, Howlscaraptor. Basically, if the name ends in raptor, it's probably a dromaeosaur. There are only a few that don't, like Deinonychus and Dromaeosaurus itself. But they're famously unfeathered in the models in both the Creation Museum and the Ark Encounter. However, Dr. Menton was on AIG's channel just yesterday telling the world that dromaeosaurs are not feathered dinosaurs. They are, in fact, flightless birds.
Okay.
So
I
am not sure if he is changing his mind or if AIG is changing their mind and they're going to try and revise.
I'm waiting for them to put a walking whale on the Ark, and not just like Tacitus, which nobody else will know. I want to see a makeshift wooden and wax tank that has 2 Dorodons sitting in it sooner or later. It's going to happen.
Well, they seem to be kind of iffy about what has to be on and off the Ark in terms of like how aquatic it can be, because I believe they have crocodilians on the Ark.
I don't know how much they consider like whether or not these like different these like different animals they want to say are like attributed to post-flood speciation. I don't know how often they really consider the implications that has for the flood geology aspect of it. Because if you want to go like the Kurt Wise route and say that whales came off the ark and took over an ocean that was in the pre-flood world dominated by marine reptiles and sharks and other things. You have to have the entire Cenozoic being a post-flood deposit to explain the evolution of the fossils of whales. But then you have young Earth creationists like Ord and Tim Clary who are absolutely adamant that it is impossible for that depth and like widespread scale of sediment to be explained in a like 800-year post-flood ice age or something to that effect. I think the solution is pretty obvious. The evolution is true, but there's no flood deposit to be arguing about.
Right, or at least no global flood deposit.
Yeah.
Let's see. So there you go. That actually was a fascinating thing for me to see because Alan, they're talking about the Dromaeosaurs or dinosaurs thing because AIG has been inconsistent on this. They've called Microraptor a bird, but they've also been pretty adamant the Velociraptor, despite being in the same family, is a dinosaur and not a bird and didn't have feathers. So I'm going to be, I might make a quick little video actually just talking about the inconsistencies of that stance from AIG, but I'm also probably going to do like a fairly long form examination of that speech because it was really bad. Really, really bad. Yeah, so from what I can tell, Menton has a PhD in, I think it's biochemistry, and he also has an MD. Of course, neither of these things qualifies him to talk about paleontology. So as far as anyone is concerned, his knowledge of paleontology and comparative anatomy in vertebrates is no more highly credentialed than mine is. I, however, have the advantage of doing things like reading primary sources on the matter. So, yeah, but that's probably something I'm going to do. I'm currently working on a different birds and dinosaurs thing that it's not going to come out for a while. The first couple videos are already uploaded, but it's going to be a fair bit before they actually come out. So don't hold your breath on that one, but it is coming. Let's see. From Dark Knight Apologetics, at Dapper Dinosaur for Colton, what do you think of the astronomy evidence for an old universe like distant starlight and supernovae?
I really should have thought about that when I was coming out of the geology thing as like just sort of an extra like support for why I think that the young Earth view is untenable. But I never really gave it much thought at the time. Now, currently, my view on it is they are so desperate to explain it away that they are literally trying to argue that the speed of light is infinite towards the Earth. So when we see a supernova happen in 1987, it literally happened in 1987, and it got here instantly. That's Jason Lyle in the Anisotropic Synchronization Convention. If you have to argue that, and you admit that there's no way to test it, I don't know what to say. You are conceding the argument and saying, yeah, but what if it just gets here immediately?
Yeah. Yeah, it's...
As far as I'm concerned, the fact that those supernova actually occur and the fact that there's an indirect test, I feel, for Lyle and his convention thing. And it's the fact that it doesn't explain the morphological appearance that you see the further out you go into the cosmos.
Right.
There is no reason that rephrasing. There is no way he can explain why we have relativistic jets coming out of quasars, which take hundreds of thousands of years minimum to reach that distance, traveling at the speed of light, just for the sheer scale of it, other than to say God made the universe in such a way that it looks like this stuff came out of the quasar's center to form these jets, and then the light coming from those jets reaches us immediately.
Right.
So it has to fall back on a deceptive history.
Yeah. Things have to have just been made to appear old. It basically just comes back down to, one, you're going to break physics a bit, and two, omphalism, which, I mean, why not just start with omphalism at that point?
Yeah, honestly, if you want to say, it's the same thing with the flood geology. Like, at what point, how many miracles do you have to invoke? You've got John Baumgartner, who's gone on record saying that catastrophic plate tectonics cannot account for its heat problem without God miraculously taking away the heat. In that point, why are you trying to argue for rapid subduction? Why are you trying to argue for rapid field reversals by natural mechanisms? If you're going to invoke an extra biblical miracle to explain away a physical problem, just do it for everything else. There's nothing to stop you. There's no scriptural reference to one, so you shouldn't have a problem invoking more.
Or just say that everything about it is miraculous. There's no evidence. There's just no evidence at all. It's a miracle. Just stop there.
I frankly find it with how the Ark Encounter does all these things with kinds and stuff. I frankly find it more convincing to just say that God made the inside of the Ark like a TARDIS. Honestly, I find that more of a convincing argument than whales evolved to modern forms by the time Rome was around in 2,000 years.
Yeah, it's. It would have been about 2,000 years that would have had to take place. I was just trying to do like the math. Actually, it probably would have been a little less. It probably would have been closer to 1,600 years.
Yeah.
Yeah. Good luck trying to get Pachycetus to turn into a blue whale in 1,600 years. And then telling me that we never see evolution, which is another thing they say a lot. It's like we never see evolution, but we can totally go from a four-legged hoofed animal to a blue whale in under 2,000 years. That's perfectly reasonable. Okay, guys, sure.
Yeah.
So this is from Eric Viertaler 92. Question for Colton. Does he think YECs and flat earthers are a threat to our educational systems and freedom of speech laws are being abused because of YECs and flat earthers false info?
I would say young earth creationists are definitely a bit of a problem when it comes to public education. I don't think anyone takes flat earthers seriously.
I barely think the flat earthers do.
Yeah. Young earth creationists are more prevalent, and it's because if you know anything about how the human mind works, you cannot sit here and tell me that these connections that your brain forms to distrust scientists on so-called historical science isn't going to carry over. It's going to. You're going to, because if the people in the geology and the paleontology and the evolutionary biology are all just making shit up, you're going to tell me that's not going to carry over to, well, what are the doctors doing that we don't know about? What are the astronomers doing that we don't know about? Because that's how the human mind works. It looks for connections that reinforce itself, and it looks for patterns and things it's already seen or thinks it's seen. So I think it's that those kind of things sowing distrust in the scientific community, which the young earth creationism camp likes to do, definitely is a bit of a problem. Not going to say it's as bad as the anti-vaxxers, but it's there.
Yeah. All right. Every once in a while, as I'm scrolling through questions, YouTube likes to just send me to the bottom of the chat, and it's like, no, YouTube, I need to be not at the bottom. Okay, this is from TD Lane. Would Colton like to join the Chaos Squad in Black Crusade? I think I know the answer to this one. What are you thinking, Colton?
Yes.
Okay.
I want those poor guardsmen to think that my armor was painted red when it's not.
Well, not by paint. We might have a Khorne Berserker amongst our little warband there.
Oh, yes, you do. My friend who's into Warhammer told me exactly how those work and how they're just a complete rampage, so I want to do that.
All right. I will make sure that we get the rule book that has the character options for Khorne Berserkers.
Awesome.
So, let's see. Where else am I? T Lane points out that Menton is channeling Fiducia. Yeah, he's going full Fiducia. It's like the joke from Tropic Thunder. You never go full Fiducia. Just let's see. Dan Curtis says, "Thank you both so much for answering my questions. You're top blokes. You are too for just for stopping by, man. I appreciate everyone who's here. And yeah, I mean that's why we go on air, right? Is to talk to people and hang out, and if you got questions, ask them." Apparently, Gutsick Gibbon had to get out of here. So, Erica, if on the off chance you're still hearing this or you watch it later, take care. And hey, I'm sure that one of us will be on the other's channel pretty soon. So, let's see. Where else am I? From Vandali 1998, does Colton have a favorite creationist that he debunks?
If you're talking about any of the professionals, no, not really. They're all kind of equally bad, and they all recycle each other's claims. So,
what about the unprofessionals?
Mr. Paul Douglas Price on Debate Evolution is he's a events manager for Creation.com, and he and I have had some pretty nasty back and forths. he tried to do like a public call out for me on calling myself like a weak agnostic theist, and was like, why do you believe in God if you think evolution's true? And other mods were like, well, no, he's explicit that he doesn't have doubts about his belief in God because of evolution. It's other things. Oh, well, he won't tell me. So I told him everything, and he backed down.
Well, at least he managed to back down.
Yeah.
I continually have people in the comments, and it's kind of annoying, insisting that this is a fight between evolution and atheism and Christianity. It's like, no, I guarantee you will
Literally
not find my channel talking about it.
Naturalism is a crutch.
Yeah,
That's all it is.
It's like you don't have a better argument. It bothers you that people accept this thing and you don't understand their reasons, or you refuse to.
Bill Ludlow had a beautiful thing, bless his soul, where he was saying, like, he made a video about how assumptions is just this little word that creationists need to hang on to, because it's just, they try to use it as an out key for everything.
Yeah. I'm trying to make sure that I have next question. Dapper Dino, if we were to put someone or a camera 65 million light years away from Earth, do you think we would be able to see dinosaurs?
Not according to Lyle.
Well, one, not according to Lyle. Two, in reality, well, you probably have to go back a little bit farther, because it looks right now like the KPG boundary is probably actually more like 66 million years ago. We'll just say 70. Okay, so you're 70 million light years away. The big problem you're going to have there is just not having enough resolution. And
Wouldn't
having
you need a receptor for your camera that's like half the size of the galaxy in order to get that kind of resolution?
Yeah, the problem would not be like the time travel for light or anything like that. It would just be that you couldn't physically build a satellite big enough to resolve something as small as a dinosaur from that distance. So, unfortunately, the answer is essentially no. So, sorry.
Yeah.
Let's see. And there's Gutsick Gibbons' goodbye remark. So, thank you, Erica, for stopping on by. Let's see. Do we have any more? Oh, we have a question. Eric. Oh, that was for Erica. It's Erica with a K, the snark. Oh, and Icarus says skulls for Korn's throne. Yes, blood for the blood god, by the way. Just I'll put that out there. Skulls for the skull throne of Korn. Make sure you collect a whole lot of skulls. Let's see. Trying to see. I think we are actually caught up on questions.
Looks like it.
There is something with a question mark. So there's a few question marks here. I'll just read them out since they have question marks at the end. Icarus says, wait, you're a weak theist? There you go. All right. Except that, wait, no, you can't be, because apparently this channel is all about atheism and atheists, and I only let atheists on here because I hate Jesus.
Yeah, God forbid that I don't subscribe to actual, like, metaphysical naturalism.
I know.
I subscribe to methodological naturalism.
No, that's a made-up distinction.
No, it's not.
You're not allowed.
I understand God could do a miracle. I also understand that I can't use that to save my theory when it literally fails at fundamental physics.
So Z Leaping Bear says, AIG is not Christianity, is it? Ain't it just crazy batshit? So it is mostly crazy batshit, but for me, for something to be a Christian organization, there are certain doctrinal beliefs that they have to hold to. Otherwise, and if they do, then I would consider them Christian. If they don't, then I would consider them not Christian. And I have sort of like two kind of versions of what it means to be Christian. There's the broad one, and then there's the more narrow one. The more narrow one involves things like sort of the historically core doctrines of Christianity, if you look back through the history of the religion. The more broad one would admit a larger group of people who just happen to believe in God or Jesus, as part of their theology. So with the broad definition, if you think Jesus is an important part of your theology, then under the broadest sense, you can be said to be a Christian. Under the more narrow sense, if you believe that Jesus is God and that he is the thing that saves humanity and provides them with salvation and access
Yeah,
to
I wouldn't
life.
really say people who call Jesus just some like cool dude with good ideas. I wouldn't call them Christian.
I would say that that's not true. There has to be some significant theological aspect to him that involves.
What the Bible says, I guess. I mean, it's like
it has to at least involve your sort of soteriology for me to call you a Christian. If it doesn't, then I don't really think it might be Christian adjacent, but I kind of go back and forth as to whether or not people who aren't Trinitarians would fit into what's probably the historical understanding of Christianity. Sometimes no.
Theology is not my cup of tea.
Yeah, basically, there are a lot of gradations in what it means to be a Christian, and I would say the AIG meets most of the stricter definitions of Christianity in terms of their belief systems. But
my whole theological approach is if I need it, I go talk to the father at my local Catholic church. If I need some theological guidance or I have like a question, I go to him, and that's as far as it goes. I don't get into a massive argument about it.
We have a super chat for $1.99 from Eric Viertaler who says, Colton, I've heard stupider arguments from flat earthers. Yeah, he's told me some of the arguments.
In what context are we still? Is this like referring to Lyle and the instant speed of light thing? Because I can imagine there's stupider stuff.
Well, according to Eric, he was once told that the Earth was flat because football wasn't real.
Okay.
Yep, I've never understood how that one worked, but that is apparently, and I believe it. So let's see. All right, I think that is it for questions. So I think, and we're past an hour 45, so I think it's a pretty good time to wrap this up. I've had a lot of fun. Colton, do you have anything that you want to plug? Any websites, books? It doesn't even have to be you, just anything that you want people to check out.
Get the Rocks Were There by R.J. Downard and Jackson Weed. It is a beautiful book responding to the new Answers books by Answers in Genesis. It's almost halfway just technical citations, and I've been fact checking them as I go through it, and boy, they are on point. It's a reliable source. I
have that book on the way to my apartment right now. It has not been delivered yet, but it is on the way. I have received RJ's earlier work, Evolution Slam Dunk, which I'm currently reading, and I'm enjoying it immensely. So there you go. Check that out.
TD dropped the link. The Rocks Were There.
TD Lane drops the link. So check that out. That is not an affiliate link. So none of the money is going to me. It's all going to Amazon, RJ, and Jackson.
Yep.
So as far as me, channel news. All right. So Tuesday, we have Kent with Bent 24, The Hovind Heresy, which is a special requested title from TD Lane. So if you don't understand it or you love it or whatever, TD Lane is the one to blame. Let's see. Thursday, I will be releasing a special video focusing on linguistics because I had a special request from Bent Hovind, because Bent Hovind is not only my co-host for Kent with Bent, but he is also my top patron on Patreon, and he gets a video request. So I kept bugging him. I was like, hey, what do you want this to be on? And so we started talking about the episode of Star Trek The Next Generation, Darmok, which is Season 5, Episode 2. So I'm going to go look at the linguistics of the Tamarians and their metaphor-driven language from the episode Darmok, if you're familiar with that. It's a quick little, 10-minute, 20-second or so video talking about the... let's just say the problems in linguistics that the writers came across. And I also give an option as to how a future sci-fi writer could keep the same kind of concept, but make it more linguistically feasible while keeping in mind that aliens don't have to think like humans. So, yeah, I give you some options there for your future sci-fi writing options if you want them. Let's see. Then Saturday, I don't know. I've been talking with a viewer who I have to double check my email. He may or may not have gotten back to me by now, but we may be trying to do another Leaving on Earth Creationism with him. If that doesn't happen, what will probably end up happening is that the next episode of Noah Zookeeper will premiere at noon on that next Saturday. Then the next Tuesday will be Kent with Bent 25, No Kentry for Old Men. Yep. We always have the cringiest and also most chuckle-inducing.
I love dad puns. It's fine.
It's great. Then that next Thursday, I'm hoping to have a little expose on someone who has been scamming the paleontology enthusiast crowd on Facebook.
Is this in reference to that thing where somebody in China like found a fossil spider allegedly, and the whole thing ended up being a fake, and this was actually pretty recent? If not, that happened.
No, although actually, so Clifford Reynolds, thank you. I will be checking that. I'll be getting back to you real quick today. I am probably going to not be doing any more work for the channel until Tuesday, probably, because I haven't taken a couple days off in a row in a while, and so I need to do that. I need to actually take a break because I've been going pretty hard, and I need to, So I will get back to you on that, and I'm also going to be uploading that video about the linguistics of the episode Darmok to YouTube, right after we get off air. So yeah, hopefully that Thursday, so not next Thursday, but the Thursday after, will be my little expose. I've gathered some firsthand Facebook messages about people he's collected money from. I've found out his previous business that went out of business after achieving over 150 complaints with the Better Business Bureau and an F rating. Yeah, he has taken thousands. He has taken thousands from people in a number of communities, which I consider myself a part of, including paleontology enthusiasts, people who are fans of Star Trek, Aliens, Predator, Stargate 1, StarCraft. Just basically, if it's nerdy, he's probably taken people's money and never delivered. So we're going to have a little talk about him. It's going to be fairly short, but yeah, I just want to let people know. I'm naming him. You don't get to know it yet, but his name and face is going to be on there because he's scamming people. So I don't care about his privacy. It's there to warn you against him, so you know who he is. So I have certain rules about doxing, and I try not to ever do it. But I don't consider revealing screen names to be doxing, for one thing. That's your public screen name. That's your public screen name. If it happens to be your real name, maybe you shouldn't do that. But the other thing is, if you're scamming people, if you're taking their money and not giving them the requested items, your name and face are going up. If it's something that I feel like I need to involve myself in, and since this has been to do with him scamming people of fossil replicas that he's trying to sell, yeah, you're gonna get to see his name and his face and hear all about his shady past. So look forward to that. Hopefully that will be next Thursday. I have to still record the audio and get the all the visuals up. And I do have to consult with Bent Hoven, who did a little undercover investigation for me in this matter. So, and then that's as far ahead as I can look. So I have a plan for at least the next week and a half, probably the next 2 weeks. And even if that doesn't come out that Thursday, I have other videos. I have 5 videos currently uploaded to YouTube that are waiting to be scheduled for premieres. So whatever happens, there is at least several weeks worth of Dapper Dino content. I could die, and as long as someone has control of this channel, you'd still get another 2 weeks worth of Dapper Dino.
That's awesome.
So there you go. Thank you everyone for showing up. Thank you very much, especially to Vandali 1998 and Eric Viertaler 92, our super chatters. And all 52 or 3 of you, I think, at peak who showed up, and probably closer to 70 or 80 that actually were here in total, because different people drop in and come out at various times. Very much appreciated. Colton, any last final words?
Not really. Not much else to add.
All right. Well, I'll see all of you later.